It's been 5 days since the dead began to walk, and the world fell apart, pretty fucking quickly. Nobody really knew at first what was going on. Television news channels and radio broadcasts were saying something about a strain of COVID-19 that was causing people to fall into a state of violent mental agitation. Others blamed global warming and its detrimental effect on the protein function that caused a mutation in the brain's central nervous system. But these were just theories. But as the days went by, it became clear that this was no ordinary apocalypse. As chaos spread throughout the city, I found myself holed up in my flat, trying to make sense of the madness outside. The streets were littered with the bodies of the now infected. Their eyes glazed over, and blood pouring out of the gaping wounds from torn flesh. As the victims' final breaths were taken, weird erratic body movements ensued, as the contagion circulated around the bloodstream, infecting and reanimating the trillion-something cells in each lifeless corpse. It was like something out of a horror movie, except, this was real life. One by one, each body rose up, and the infected corpses turned towards the living. Their movements were fast and charged, as they zoned in on their targets with pinpoint accuracy. The survivors could only watch in terror, as their former friends and loved ones stumbled towards them, driven by some primal need for flesh and blood. Emergency services were overwhelmed, and police forces rendered helpless, due to the non-use of firearms. By the time the army was brought in to control the situation, it was too late. The dead were multiplying, faster than they were being neutralized. I had enough supplies to last me a couple of weeks. And I was filling up buckets, bowls, and anything else that could store water, just in case the supply was cut off. I armed myself with whatever weapons I could find around the flat, and managed to scavenge a couple of large knives from a kitchen drawer, a wooden baseball bat and a claw hammer from my toolbox. It wasn't much, and it felt inadequate against the ravenous dead army, whose size was growing larger and larger with each passing hour. I could feel the weight of desperation and anxiety settling in my chest. I'd always been a fighter, but as I watched the city crumble around me, I was paralyzed with pure fear. London had become a battlefield, as the undead feasted on the living. Screams filled the night air, and fires erupted from cars piling into one another, as they desperately tried to flee the hordes of the dead rising. Suddenly, without warning, all lights inside and out flickered, and just died. And an oppressive darkness covered all of London. The dead started to advance around my flat as the building's generators kicked in, making enough noise to reel in the infected like a hungry corpse dinner invitation. Then came the sound, the unmistakable shuffle of feet against concrete. 20, 30 maybe 40 silhouettes marching toward the windows. Panic clawed at my throat, as I peered through the boarded-up windows' grime-streaked glass. There they were, dead but walking, driven by a need to feast on warm human flesh. Their facial features were almost trance-like, their expressions blank, and devoid of any emotion, with eyes, sunken deep, within hollow sockets, and their skin was a sickly shade of purple, discolored, due to the livor mortis that had set in after their deaths. It was a sight straight out of a nightmare. As the creatures closed in, their hungry cries echoed through the flat like a chorus of lost souls, clawing and pounding at the windows and door with a hurricane-like force. Glass started to shatter from the large front room window as they broke through, obliterating the makeshift barricading I'd used to try to reinforce the window's weaker spots. As one corpse burst through, my hands trembled as I swung the claw hammer as hard as I could, against its head, watching it fall to the floor with a swift deadly blow. Others followed, with the same feeding frenzied look on their faces. Mouths wide open, ready to tear what flesh I had on my bones. I lashed out with 2 razor-sharp carving knives, slashing and stabbing for my very survival, and breaking one of the blades, in the process in the dead ghoul's skull. It wasn't that hard to put them down, but I was outnumbered, and had nowhere else to run. As I backed my way to the bathroom, there was a loud crash and the front door buckled, spewing another herd of flesh-eaters into the flat. Momentarily distracted, I suddenly felt an agonizing sensation in my leg, as a young girl took a chunk clean out of my thigh, severing my femoral artery. Blood gushed out like a red river bursting its banks, and I could feel myself going into shock. In a blind panic, I stumbled into the windowless bathroom and fell against the door, closing it shut. As the dead continued to batter the threshold, I slumped onto the cold tiled floor as unconsciousness ushered in what would ultimately be my untimely death. and ghoulish. Resurrection.